So I'm Dottie Caplan. I lead our patient advocacy and engagement efforts at Applied Therapeutics. We are a very small startup biotech company based in Manhattan. I live south of Boston here, and we're loving this beautiful weather that's out there, so hopefully you get to enjoy it. This time of year is the best. So I thought maybe what I would start off with, I'm just going to walk you through what does it look like to be in a trial, real world, with our CMT sword. And I have some tips and suggestions of what we've learned and what I've heard from our participants along the way. So first of all, what is CMT sword deficiency? It's a genetic mutation in the enzyme sorbitol dehydrogenase. And what happens is sorbitol, which is a toxic substance, builds up in the body and the blood and the tissues, and especially the motor neurons. And this results in neurological symptoms like difficulty walking, lower limb weakness, muscle fatigue, and pain, and even tremor. And this collective progression of symptoms does have a very large impact on functionality and also quality of life. And there's also a social and emotional burden associated with SORD. There are 3,500 to 5,000 people in the US that have this. And typically people are diagnosed with CMT2 unknown type or distal hereditary motor neuropathy. CMT SORD is not necessarily on all of the panels that they screen for CMT, so it's important that your doctor or you specifically talk about having that added or your test rerun for it if you have one of those other diagnoses. So when it comes to the clinical trial, it really all started with some preclinical data, and you heard Janine talk about that process, with another rare disease for Applied Therapeutics, galactosemia. So when we were faced with starting our initial pilot study, which was a very small population study of 8 people, which was an open label study just to look at sorbitol reduction, we were able to do that very quickly. And I'll tell you, people in this community were lined up to be in that, and it was amazing. And I'll talk a lot about how we've been able to come through things so quickly with this collaboration with this community. So the pilot study did show a 66% reduction in sorbitol versus baseline, and so we quickly pivoted our time to our phase 3 registrational study. This is in 6 sites in the US, in the UK, in Milan, Italy, and Prague in the Czech Republic. It's a double blind, so people don't know if they're getting the drug or not. It's a placebo-controlled, so 2 to 1 people will be randomized either active treatment or a placebo. And it was in patients, about 50 patients over the age of 16, and 16 was UK, and the US it was 18. So when you start a trial, you go through all of the things Janine talked about, but on the first day when you show up at the clinic, you're gonna set some baseline tests for your sorbitol levels and outcomes, and that will be the measure of which the future interim analyses are based on. For the CMT SORD trial at 3 months, there was a primary efficacy biomarker reviewed, and at the 3-month mark, there was a 52% reduction in this larger population in sorbitol levels. So the trial continued, and then there was a 12-month interim assessment that looked at the correlation of sorbitol on outcomes, clinical outcomes, the CMT FOM and lower limb measures, which is the 10-minute walk-run test, 6-minute walk test, dorsiflexion, and sit to stand. There was a statistically significant correlation of sorbitol on outcomes, and there was a second measure assessed at 12 months, which was the CMT high, the CMT health index. That's a patient-reported outcome on the disease severity from a patient's perspective and their well-being. And there was a highly statistically significant correlation in the govorestat treatment arm on the CMT high index as well. So the drug was safe and well tolerated in the clinical study. And so this data generated actually a conversation with FDA that led to a discussion about the data being appropriate for a potential submission to the FDA under the accelerated approval pathway, which is incredibly exciting. This, of course, would require a phase 4 post-marketing study, but the conversations with the FDA are still underway. We hope to have a pre-NDA meeting in the second half of 2024 and potentially a submission to the NDA in Q1 2025. There's still a lot of work to be done. And I would say there were also 2 exploratory measures in the clinical trial, and these exploratory measures are important because there's often hypotheses about how you measure improvement with the treatment, and so there was an exploratory endpoint of muscle MRI, and there was also an exploratory biomarker of NFL, neurofilament light. I'm not the scientist to go into details on that, but I'm sure we have people here who can speak to you about those after. But our hope is that we'll learn more about those exploratory endpoints that can inform future research. And I think you did hear a lot about those 2 measures earlier today. So where we are in the trial now is everyone in the trial will roll over into an open label, and they will continue to be monitored for safety going forward. But the work began a lot earlier. CMT, SORD, and the SORD gene was discovered recently, so we had a lot of work to do just to make people aware that there was this new genetic mutation, to get tested, to get diagnosed, to have a conversation with their doctor, to consider the pilot study, to be screened for the phase 3 study, which we did, and to potentially participate in our phase 3 study. And the enrollment, in large part, was due to the incredible response of the community, the readiness of the community, and the engagement that the community had to be in first-line communications when those things happened. And so this multifaceted approach looked at generating awareness of the disease, awareness of the trial, and also patient insights, because we still had a lot to learn about SORD itself. And here are just a few examples of some of the materials we used. We tried to account for all the ways that people like to receive information. Not everybody's on social media, although we did have some toolkits for people to get the word out. But the web, internet, emails, newsletters, social media, we tried to cover the gamut of channels to be able to reach everyone we could. And here's just a few examples of what the social media toolkit looked like. We still have a lot of ongoing work. There are a lot of people that yet need to be diagnosed with CMT SORD, so our work continues to get the word out so people can have a conversation with their doctor and get the test. And finally, the journey has been one, I spoke of collaboration and working together in partnership, and we've been able to move fast. Well, our CEO, Shoshana Shendelman, moves fast all the time. And she has a sense of urgency she instills in the organization, but we've been able to do that because the community's been involved and ready and waiting and have raised their hand to be a part of this, and they stepped up so quickly to enroll in the trial. So I know we'll get into some of this later, but some of the key success factors here is early and often conversations and engagement and collaboration with doctors and patients, understanding the journey, but having them weigh in on the trial design and endpoints. So we had the patient-reported outcomes as part of the trial. We did a lot of focus groups to understand the disease and incorporated those experiences into our research and the experience in the clinical trial. And of course, the educational materials. But we can't forget that this all has to happen in a positive way for the people participating, and we tried to do a lot to account for the fact that you're adding a clinical trial on top of your everyday life, work and home and family and children. And so we really tried to design the trial to be as easy as possible, as stress-free as possible, with home visits. We had a nursing team that went to homes of patients. We would provide a calendar so they could actually plan and know what the appointments were coming up on the calendar so they could work around the school schedules. Our nurses would go to where they were if they weren't home to make it convenient for them, and ensuring they had a kitchen to cook good healthy meals. These things seem so little, but in a day-to-day world, it does make a big difference. And I will just leave you here with some tips. I think Janine talked about some of these, but being informed and connected in every way possible with the patient organizations, with your doctor. Reach out to the patient advocacy person at companies that are doing research. If you have CMT SORD and I haven't met you, please, I want to meet you. They all do, and they will accept your call and readily speak with you and keep you in the loop, whenever and wherever they can. And if you're not into the trials, market research is super important, so a focus group, a survey, any way that you feel comfortable participating helps to inform the research and make this a better experience for everyone. So there is something for everyone. If it's not a trial, you can still help that process regardless. So I just want to thank you again for your time, and we'll take questions in a little bit.